All right, so the condo market in Toronto is doing absolutely horribly. The high-rise market in general is dead. Pre-construction's even worse than resale. Actually, it's holding up considerably worse than resale. We're gonna get into that in this video today. I wanted to start off, it's been a while since I've been on YouTube, I apologize. So I wanted to start off this year with sort of a where we've been and where I think we might be going, because honestly, I do not see a world in which the Toronto condo market does very well this year. I could be wrong. I would love to be wrong on that, but I'll show you why and I'll get into my rationale. So the first thing we're gonna start off with is something you guys all love, which is a little bit of loss porn. So here's a unit at 50 Charles Street. All right, it's sold in 2022 for $965,000. This is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. It's very small, 690 square feet. Okay, sold for $965,000. It just resold in December for $799,000. So considerable loss on this property. The reason I bring this one up is because it is a direct comparable, a resale comparable to, this is Yorkville here, okay? Obviously you've got Yonge and Bloor, and here you can see one Bloor, right? Which thank God Tridel took that one over. Probably the best possible outcome. But anyways, here on Charles Street, we have 55C, which is completing. And if we go look at some of the product that was sold pre-construction at 55C. So here's an example. You have a 1-bedroom, 537 square feet. Back at launch, this bad boy was listed at $839,900. And I should probably blow this up a little bit. And you can see that some of these units were sold as high as $1 million, right? Of course, we can't tell how many units were sold at that price, but you get the idea. You have this unit selling at $2,000 a square foot. Meanwhile, on the resale market, you have 690 square feet selling for $799,000. And the reason for this disparity in value is really two things. Number one is the downtown condo market has not seen any price growth since 2020, give or take. That's about 5 years. Now, of course, that plateau follows an incredible rip in the market. And so it's good to see that from an affordability standpoint, but from a pre-construction standpoint, that's quite literally the worst thing in the world to see, because we all know that pre-construction condos have been selling above resale market value with the anticipation that the resale market will catch up when you close. Obviously, most people assume that it will far exceed the price that they locked in the contract at, which is why we've got this underbelly of the pre-construction market of people who purchase these things with no intent to close, just to flip for profit. And of course, in these days, they're not actually walking away with any profit. In fact, they're lucky if someone will take half or all of their deposits to avoid litigation. Now, like I said, the resale condo market not doing well at all. So you have almost 8 months of inventory. This is a chart from Scott Ingram on Twitter. Great follow. Almost 8 months of inventory, came down in the last week report there, but 7 months of inventory in the condo market, almost 5 months of inventory in the freehold market. 7 months of inventory is certainly a level of inventory where you see prices continue to sort of correct and grind down. Now, it's not just the resale market that's not faring well. The rental market is not faring well either. So if we look at the report from rentals.ca here on a national level, you can see that year over year, for January of 2025, year over year, you see Vancouver's down 7%, Toronto's down 6.4%, Mississauga down 4%, Etobicoke down 3.4%. And it's not just the condo segment because of this glut of pre-construction inventory that's closing and people are renting out for cash flow negative. It's more or less inventory agnostic. You can see here that house and townhouse rentals have declined 7%, and this nationally, but 7% and 5% for condominiums. Now, the reason I don't see a quick turnaround on rents here is because it is unlikely for rents to grow in a situation where we are starting to rein in on student visas. We're starting to slow down on non-permanent resident growth in the country. Now, assuming that continues to be the case, of course, you can see that the correlation between national rent rates and the amount of NPRs we're bringing in have a direct correlation. I bring this up because the sales pitch for most pre-construction condos in the last, call it 5 years, has basically been this, that population growth is outpacing housing supply growth. Therefore, greater fool theory, somebody's going to pay more for it. So even if it's on paper cash flow negative, well, that doesn't really matter. And to the credit of that argument, for the last 10 years, it hasn't mattered if you were cash flow negative, because somebody would pay more for it 5 years later. And anybody who bought a pre-construction condo in 2014 and then assignment flipped it in 2019, they did make an absurd amount of money for doing absolutely nothing and never closing on a property. But Obviously, that only works until it doesn't. So Urban Nation put out this report. You've probably seen it because I'm incredibly slow on my YouTube content these days. But basically, we saw the lowest new condo, pre-construction condo sales across the GTA since the 90s. 90s not widely regarded as a great decade for real estate, but also just adjusting for popular, I think 4.5 millish people back then, over 6 now. So population adjusted, probably almost as bad as the early 90s, if not as bad. And when we look at the Altus numbers in specific, you can kind of see here. So the 10-year average for pre-construction sales in the GTA is just under 22,000 units. And last year, so 2024, we did 4,720 units. Freehold on a percentage basis faring a little bit better, so 5,000 units. And of course, that just illustrates the point that freehold pre-construction has a larger percentage share of homeowners and users purchasing the product versus condos having a much larger share of investors. Of course, when it comes to investor sentiment, it is at probably an all-time low right now. We've seen the pivot, right? Toronto pre-construction got too inflated, and then COVID, and so people pivoted to Calgary pre-construction, and tons of money poured into that market. People made millions and millions of dollars, and when I say people, I mean brokers. And then we've seen the pivot again into the CMHC MLI Select product, which is essentially high leverage loans on multifamily product. Hopefully it plays out well for the participants. It's just fascinating, Canada as a whole, just we love leverage. That's why people buy pre-construction on these super extended deposit structures. That's why when developers are in their boardroom coming up with their sales and incentive package, they know that pricing a little bit higher but having a much lower deposit structure is, generally speaking, to investors a more attractive option. People are a little bit less focused on, and same thing with price per square foot, right? Developers know, and if the launches that have done somewhat well versus all the ones that have tanked in the last 2 years tell you anything, it's that if it's an investor-centric product, they know price per square foot is somewhat less important to investors than just end price. So get the units as small as humanly possible. That way your end price comes down and your capital outlay, is as your actual deposit on that unit is as small as possible, and that's a more attractive offering to most investors. When we look at price per square foot specifically, and you see sort of the peak there, we've only come down to a 1334 average price per square foot from about 1,400. So very little regression in the average price per square foot of the pre-construction units. But I think that's changing because you are seeing developers deeply discount their lingering inventory product. And what that means is, if they've already achieved 75% sales and they're under construction, but they still have, 20% of their units left, if they sold those units at the peak and got really good value on the sales of those 75%, essentially they can discount those further 20% units, or maybe discount 10% of the units just to get some sales and some momentum. Because when you blend, if they sold $1,400 a foot and they're willing to do maybe 10% of their building at $1,150 or $1,100 a foot, when you blend it out, the numbers probably still work for them. And so you're seeing that in some cases. A lot of the times the developers won't allow that stuff to be marketed very publicly. They'll call you up and say, hey, just offer this to clients over the phone. Don't email blast it. I don't want past purchasers to see. But it is something that's happening. It's not super widespread because obviously the margins just aren't there for every developer to be able to do something like that. But you are seeing it. And I think you'll see more of that type of thing if construction costs start to come down. So Daniel here tweeted this the other week. He said, construction prices dropping from a big developer. Formwork prices down to $15 a square foot from, I'm assuming peak bid there at $22 to $23 a square foot. Now, I don't have anything to back this up, but Dan is reputable enough for me to just quote him as the source. So we're going to take that at face value. And if you say that formwork prices are coming down a bit, then it stands to reason that other construction prices will start to come down as well. So construction prices are obviously just one part of an input cost on building a new condo building, right? Land cost is another one. And when we look at the Bullpen Consulting High-Rise Land Insights report, great report to subscribe to, you can see the trend of the price of land for condos from 2018 through 2024, and you can see that it has fallen considerably from about an average of 120 a foot to about, what are we at now, $90 a foot, give or take. Obviously, land sales happen sporadically all over the place with different zoning, and so it's really hard to extrapolate, but you can see that land prices are down at least 20, 30%. The other big thing to watch, and I don't know if anything will happen here, but we've seen some movement in Mississauga and stuff, so it maybe is development charges, right? So we know that almost 30% of the cost of a new home is taxes. And a big chunk of that is development charges. We know that the government associated cost with building housing has absolutely skyrocketed in the last 10 years. If you want to learn more about that, go check out Kant. They sent me an awesome Monopoly game on Toronto condos and taxes. And basically their whole pledge, and there's a bunch of developers who have signed on to this pledge, is, hey, look, any amount you reduce the development charges, we will pass on directly to consumers, which would of course mean just essentially lowering the selling price of pre-construction product. So if they bring down DCs and suddenly they can price a unit 50 grand lower on top of lower construction costs and again on top of lower land costs, that's going to really change the pricing dynamic in the pre-construction market. Product that's completing today, and 2024 and 2025 in particular are heavy completion years. So any product that completes now was sold 4, 5, 6, up to 7 years ago, depending on the developer and the development in question, but it was sold a while ago. A lot of that product was sold at really high prices. And so people who are coming up on closing, they may not get appraisals, right? Which I've said before, blanket appraisals are holding this market together. Vass and Mark Morris, my favorite lawyer in the space, just did a podcast episode actually about this. I'll link it in the description, where Mark, the lawyer, is talking about the specific cases he's seeing, people having to walk away from deposits, people getting sued by developers, that kind of thing. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll link it in the description. But regardless, you have all these people coming up on closing, right? And they are cash flow. They're in between a rock and a hard place. So let's say they do get the appraisal and they can close on it. They're still deeply cash flow negative at today's rates and today's rents. So maybe they want to sell on the assignment market. That's a lot of inventory, right? The assignment market is a brutal place to have to sell right now. The honest truth is most of that product's not going to sell. I looked at the last few assignment deals that went through our team in the last couple of months. I saw one example where this was our listing. It was listed at the original price was $660,000. They sold for $695,000. So they roughly broke even on that particular deal. But out of all the other assignments I looked at, both us on the selling and us on the buying side took a loss, at least for the last 3 months, right? So a lot of this product coming up on completion is, it's 75, 80% investors in a lot of these buildings. And so they're either going to list it on the rental market, and rents aren't great right now, and they're going to be deeply cash flow negative, maybe sell down the line, or they're just going to try to either sell right before closing or sell right after closing. So that's a lot of inventory to stack on top of the already robust inventory that we see in the resale condo market in Toronto, right? Just don't really see a bull case for the next year. Or really, when it comes to pre-construction in particular, like if we're talking new condo launches, unless somebody comes out and launches like a downtown core product with a 5-6 year closing at $1,250 a foot, like I just don't think downtown high rise is sellable for the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years. It's going to take a long time for this stuff to flush out. Now, what is the silver lining? Well, there's a couple. Number one is if you're a buyer and you're looking to take advantage of pain in this current market, the assignment market. The assignment market currently is a place where people will smile and thank you and wine and dine you for taking their whole deposit away from them, right? If they're in fear of litigation. With that being said, you have to be very careful of the deal that you get. Just wiping someone's deposit isn't necessarily the best deal. It depends on their cost basis, when they bought, which building they bought in. Do I think Pierre is going to come in and absolutely slash immigration radically? I really just don't think he's that guy. He's no Maxime Bernier. So I don't see that as being the reality, which means we return to sort of a more healthy, normal immigration level, which is still a lot, particularly when you look at the completion schedule for housing in the GTA, because this 3 years of slow pre-construction market materializes itself in less completions 5 years down the line. And you can see that on this chart here. And what Condo did here is they also showed the inventory or the scheduled completion date by if they've started construction or not yet. So for example, when you look at 2026 and you see that maybe 3,500, 4,000 of those units haven't started construction yet, well, those aren't completing in 2026. So I think you're going to continue to see Developers sort of panic, try to figure out what to do in this market. I know that as a broker, I can see the incentive shuffle, I call it, where every week there's just a new incentive on every building because they're trying to feel out and see what's gaining momentum. And honestly, you can't knock them for it. But the reality is, in a market where you've got 16,000 units sitting there just waiting to be purchased, you're all competing with each other on incentive, but the absorption rate is 300-400 units a month. Unfortunately, you just can't incentivize your way out of a bad price and bad location in a market like this, where all of a sudden investors are starting to pay attention again to fundamentals. They're looking at your per square foot and they're comparing it to buildings across the street, resale buildings. They're actually looking at their cash flow and saying, would I be okay with holding this unit for 10 years, so on and so forth. So they're going back to sort of fundamentals, whereas for, I'll say, 2018 through 2022, it was just buy whatever you can. Who cares what the price per square foot is? Now we're at Yonge and Bloor already, so I'll just show you another example of this. Here is Adagio. So let's take a look at how far under construction these guys are. Incredible location, really nice building. Yeah, it's moving, right? It's topped off. So if we look at that building in particular, right? And we pull up the original pricing. Yeah, so at launch, they were at $1,827 a square foot. Again, nothing against this building, but that's, it's expensive, right? That is up there. Studios, 372 square feet for $688. And you can see that that's actually after a price reduction of $38,000. So if we look at the pricing history here, you can see that they dropped the price. So they were up to $815 on this unit, so $2,200 a square. And of course, when you look at comps in Yorkville, you're just not seeing those types of values, right? So you have this one, 531 square feet for $630, a little bit more cookie cutter though. But if we go, so 717 square for $978, so you're $1,400 a square. Anyways, you get the idea. Like, I could sit here, I could go through the 3D model all day long and show you examples of buildings that are closing negative equity, but I won't do that. I'll save you the doom post. But anyways, you guys get the idea here. With the amount of completion still in the near-term pipeline, flooding into a market that is already barely hanging on by a thread, I just don't see a very big bull case. Now, long-term, of course, yes, we see the supply contraction. I think that in general is really good, but I think, to me, pre-construction, high-rise pre-construction, end user product is different, okay? Boutique buildings, that is what we're still selling. Like, we're still doing deals at Bellwood's house, at 8 Temple. These boutique buildings where people are buying for themselves are still selling, even in this market. Crazy as it sounds, it's happening. But the high-rise, cookie-cutter, pre-con, investor-centric stuff, I think, is going to, I think it's gonna be a few years still before prices come down to a point that people are, interested in. What have I done with my map? There we go. Mattamy came out with the Clove. This guy here, it did not do very well on launch. I said it wouldn't. People said I was crazy. Oh, they're barely more than $1,000 a foot on 3 beds. What do you mean it's not going to do well? I was like, you have Valhalla. Go look at the comps of Valhalla. Like, people are looking at comps now. Finally, I remember back in 2017 when people would look at resale values versus their pre-construction value. We're back to those fundamentals. And unfortunately for developers, the market doesn't care that your input costs don't allow you to price at resale parity or anywhere near resale parity. The market today, at least, seems willing to wait until that becomes a reality again. All right, so thanks for watching. I will see you guys next video, which will be next week.